Welcome to Safety Experts Talk. Visit our website at creativesafetysupply.com/podcast for more info, including links in the transcript of this podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is Antonio. On our episode of today is our guest, Mark Hamel. Mark is a Lean Six Sigma implementation consultant. He's an award-winning author of the Kaizen Event Fieldbook. Mark is also the founder of the Lean blog, Gemba Tales. He's also the co-founder of another blog, Lean Math, and a regular columnist for Quality Digest. Mark has successfully coached Lean leaders and associates at both the strategic and tactile level. He has facilitated hundreds of Kaizen events and conducted numerous training sessions and workshops. Mark, thanks for coming on the program with us. How are you doing today?
Good, I'm doing great. Thanks, Tony.
Let's first talk about your book. You have written an award-winning book called the Kaizen Event Fieldbook. If you would explain why you chose to write a book about Kaizen and what a reader can expect to get out of it.
Why did I write the book? I think usually when I'm blogging and writing a book and I'm in the midst of another book that I'm way behind, I apologize to my publisher, but anyway, I'm usually looking at sharing something that I could use or could have used, when I started out doing this type of stuff. Certainly in the beginning of my Lean career, which is just about 20 years ago. I had my sensei and I'd follow him around and I'd write down everything he did and said and all that kind of stuff, thinking that maybe I can capture the magic formula. And then, the next time I do something in a different way, and then the next time a little bit different way. And it was, it's more about the thinking and the strategy around how to implement or execute successful Kaizen events. So, I had done some writing, and eventually I was like, you know what? I might as well write a book, and I submitted a proposal to Society of Manufacturing Engineers, SME. And then, lo and behold, they said, yeah, let's do this. I was like, oh, I guess I better finish this thing. And that's kind of how it took shape.
Did you draw on your own Kaizen war stories when you wrote that book?
Well, there's different vignettes, if you will, little short stories called Gemba Tales, which is where we got the name for the first blog. And it's mostly just illustrate or expound on some of the concepts. But it's really about the thinking, and try to keep it from being a cookbook. Hey, when you're in this situation, you do ABCD. If you're in that situation, you do XYZ. It takes you through the foundation and framework of Kaizen. And, again, the emphasis on this book is really Kaizen events, which obviously is only part, from a Kaizen perspective, it's only part of the story. Obviously, where we want to end up is, not just be a bunch of Kaizen event folks. The Shingo Prize used to categorize that as being system-driven Kaizens. But the book will take you through a foundation framework for Kaizen, and then there's transformation leadership, because leadership is so darn important, relative to Lean leadership behaviors and support. And then we get into something we call standardized work or standard work. So there's the strategy. Let's pull in the Kaizen event. We got to be working on stuff that matters. From a strategic imperative standpoint, from a value stream improvement perspective. So if you're doing your value stream mapping, after you've identified your product families, you do the value stream mapping and come up with a value stream improvement plan. And that usually consists of Kaizen events and projects and just do it's. So those Kaizen events, they're identified and they're flagged in terms of timing and sequence. And then there's pre-event planning that includes scope and objectives and identifying the right team leader and formulating an effective team, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't want to bore people. There's a ton of detail in there.
It does sound like a book that you can find everything you need to know about running a successful Kaizen event.
Right, yeah.
Where can our listeners buy your book?
Well, you can get the book through the Society of Manufacturing Engineers. Just go to sme.org. Just search Kaizen Event Fieldbook. I know it's in Google Books, and then you can also buy hard copies at Amazon. It's a big book. It's at least 8.5 by 11. And let me measure it. Yeah, it's 8.5 by 11. It's not something you're going to put in your back pocket. So electronic might be the way to go.
That's good advice. What are some of the biggest mistakes you have actually seen organizations or businesses make when they are running Kaizen events?
Right. Yeah, so there's a bunch that I've seen. There's a bunch that I've done. When I first started out, I was a Kaizen event jockey. in no particular order, not working on what matters. If you're doing a Kaizen event, typically you've got a cross-functional team or multiple teams, anywhere from, 4 or 5 up to 8 people per team. Bigger if you break things into sub-teams. And it's for multiple days, and there's a lot of focus and disruption. So you got to make sure that you're spending this on stuff that counts. So again, that's where kind of the alignment and the direction that comes from the value stream improvement plans and the strategy deployment and that type of stuff. So you got to work on stuff that matters. You got to do it with people rather than to people. That's definitely a killer. If you're just kind of using the poor stakeholders to execute management's will, it's not going to be sustainable. Kaizen events are really just a delivery mechanism for making improvements, and the people who are driving that mechanism have to be the people.
And based on my experience, I think the biggest mistake that I've seen in Kaizen events is the wrong stakeholders are involved in the event. They don't have the right stakeholders.
Right. That's part of the pre-planning of selecting the right teams. Rough rule of thumb, a third of the folks should be coming from within the target process, a third split between upstream and downstream, and roughly a third should be fresh eyes. When I first started this stuff, 20 years ago, it was about, hey, hitting the numbers, improve productivity, 25, 30%, improve quality, by X percent. It's achieving those things, but it's also as much, if not more, about organizational learning. That's just so important. People need to learn how to think, how to make improvements, take ownership, experiment. We're following the PDCA cycle, right? So it's a cycle because you never really get it right. And we're just trying to continue to make it improve it. So that gets to another mistake, which is not following the proper rigor. The Kaizen storyline that I detail here, one of the elements there is to understand current condition and then identify issues and opportunities. And from there, you're going to come up with countermeasures. You can't do a countermeasure unless you understand the root cause. If you don't understand the causal relationship, any kind of improvement that you make is really not going to be good. So we talked about the PDCA rigor, but also SDCA, so standardize, do, check, act. So we're going to end up putting standards in place, vis-a-vis standardized work and things like that. And then we're obligated to go out and check to see if we're getting what we think we should be getting. And if not, make adjustments. You don't just say, hey, I came up with this new layout, this new standardized work. You really didn't test it. Good luck, Godspeed. You people have to live with this. And I know personally, I've never, ever, ever, first time, second time, third time, fourth time, et cetera, out of the box, ever made perfect standard work. It's just too darn hard. You got to keep trying it and improving it.
Okay. When you've got the stakeholders involved in the Kaizen, do you get a lot of bad feedback, sometimes from employees that aren't involved in the event?
Yeah, you definitely can, which is why, when you're selecting people from the target process, people who know the process, know the people, you got to get some official and unofficial leaders, and you got to communicate as you're going through the entire process, even way back into, the pre-planning. So, hey, whatever, 4, 5, 6+ weeks, whatever, we're going to be having a Kaizen event in this particular area. This is how it ties. You remember when we did the value stream mapping? This is how it ties to that future state. It's part of our value stream improvement plan. So this is why it's important. This is our approach. We're going to have this Kaizen event in this particular time. You're going to see some people out here. This is where you got to use emotional intelligence. You want people to feel a certain way. You want people to feel excited, anticipating this good stuff, knowing that they're going to participate at some level. And you got to understand how they're actually feeling now, which often is they're apprehensive. They think there's going to be a risk to their particular job. It might not be their employment, but it could be their job. And you got to figure out how to close that gap. So that's where communication, and this is where leadership is so darn important. And even throughout the event, you got to let people know what's going on and why it's going on and when it's going to go on. And those stakeholders have to be part of the process of proving out that standardized work, the new way of doing it, testing a new layout, and we're going to take their feedback and make adjustments based upon that.
There's always a stigma with employees in production. When they hear they're going to be doing a lean event, some worry about their jobs being eliminated. Do you deal with that a lot?
Well, typically we will not work with anyone who isn't principled enough to tell people that no one is going to lose their job as a result of productivity improvements.
Great.
If you're not willing to say that, people can figure that out in a hurry. It just has to happen once. You have the first workshop or event, and then some people get shot, and then you're like, okay, so who wants to do the next one? Nobody.
No doubt. Let's shift gears. How does Kaizen help the management of lean?
So you're talking events or?
Yes, events.
Yeah, so take a look at somebody like, Art Byrne, George Konensecker. I mean, they really talk about using Kaizen events very heavily, 2-3 years into the lean transformation. And that's where you can really make a lot of step function improvements versus the daily Kaizen stuff, which, is true Kaizen. That's small incremental improvements typically. So you've got places that are doing, depending upon the size, a Kaizen event per month. And there's statistics in terms of what the sweet spot is. If you look at Konensecker's book, I think it's called Leading the Lean Transformation Effort, he's got some numbers in there. It's a balancing act between getting the momentum and making the improvements and totally overwhelming the organizations. When you have Kaizen newspaper items, which are basically the leftover to-dos, that keep accumulating and you're not catching up, that's usually a good indication that maybe you're going too fast, or you're not executing the Kaizen events effectively, and or you don't have appropriate resources assigned to this type of stuff, which includes KPO-type resources.
All right. Can you share your most important tools that help you with your Kaizen events and help make your project successful?
Yeah, so I think it's more around thinking than tools, but, you use tools with that thinking. So I kind of going back to why the heck are you working on the stuff that you're working on? Certainly it's really important to have an understanding of your value stream. Call it flow Kaizen when you do value stream mapping, because you're really looking at trying to achieve as much continuous flow as possible. And that value stream improvement plan is really your roadmap. So that's really important as kind of a feeder on that. And then the Kaizen event standardized work or standard work is super important, in terms of the sequence of the event and the things that you got to be taking into account. And then there's supporting forms that can then help you. I mean, those are really tools. And I wouldn't get too tied up in forms per se, because you can certainly do them on flip charts. And actually, that's my preference in many situations. So, for example, a Kaizen event target sheet can be done on a flip chart. Some situations it makes sense to do a mission statement. You're going to have perhaps a pre-event area profile to help you kind of do the pre-planning in terms of what the scope is, what are those initial targets that we want to get at, and what's the team composition. There's a bunch of stuff there, but when you get into understanding the pre-Kaizen situation or condition, obviously things like time observation forms, spaghetti charts, percent load charts, 5S score sheets, that type of stuff. And then you post-event, you're looking at standard worksheets, standard work combination sheets. Obviously you mix in here process maps, improvement idea forms, really one-pagers to show people, to share with people, hey, here's the problem that we found, here's the action we took, here's the measurable results, here's a quick characterization, sketch, picture, whatever, of the before condition, the after condition, so on and so forth. So there's a bunch of stuff that you can use during the event that'll help kind of align thinking, and you want people to see as a team and kind of speak the same language, and those kind of tools help people do that. And then ultimately, you want to bring in lean management system elements to make sure that we sustain the improvements. So we get into things like leader standard work and the related visual controls, because we want to go back to that SDCA standardize. So we put standards in place. We hope people do them. We check to see, are we adhering to those? And is that standard work sufficient? And then we make adjustments based upon that. So we want to basically set up the infrastructure, the ecosystem, to ensure that. So that should be included in the whole tool set to make sure that it's successful.
Okay. And then based on the Kaizen events that I've been involved with, a lot of times you get to the last day of the Kaizen event, and is it pretty common to have a group that gets together and have lunch, and then they present their findings to upper management in a PowerPoint?
Right. Yeah. So that's typically what we'll call the report out or the final presentation or whatever, something that's like 20 minutes or 30 minutes per team. Their team is basically telling the story of what they did and how they did it, walking you through the journey that we took. I'd rather not do PowerPoint slides. I'd rather have people working on making improvements rather than making stuff that looks pretty. If you're going to do PowerPoint slides, heck, take a picture of the flip chart and your hand-drawn and recorded stuff and then stick that in the PowerPoint. Yeah, so this is kind of just the formal, hey, this is what we did. But what we don't want to overlook, too, and this is part of Kaizen event work strategy and standardized work, is We should be having on a daily basis at the end of each day a team leader meeting. So it's basically the team leader and the facilitator. You got a consultant, then you out-of-town guests, reviewing with leadership, hey, this was our plan for the day. This is what we accomplished. Here's the issues and barriers that got in our way. Here's our plan for tomorrow. And that keeps leadership up to speed in terms of what's going on, whether or not leadership should be giving them some help vis-a-vis resources or advice, or kick them in the tail and tell them to break through that particular barrier, stop being babies, so that when you get to that report out at the end of the event, whether it's a 2-day, 3-day, 4-day, 5-day event, you don't have senior leaders going, you did what?
Yeah, exactly.
How'd you get there? Put it all back. So that ensures you get accountability for the team leaders and also for leadership, because they can't be absentee leaders and just kind of show up at the end. Oh, by the way, they should be there for the kickoff too.
Yes.
And they should be part of the pre-planning. It's not something that just kind of hatches on its own.
Okay. And you're writing another book, you say?
Right. I got another blog, which is called Lean Math, and co-author of mine and I got hundreds and hundreds of entries around different aspects of lean math, but there's still a fair amount more to go.
When I hear lean math, I hear numbers. I hear multiplication. Is that what it is?
It's, especially if you're in the manufacturing side of lean, there's a tremendous amount of math that's required. So if you just look at inventory and understanding demand and all that kind of stuff, you're sizing Kanbans. There's, literally probably got 100 pages worth of stuff around that, around demand variation and understanding of that, and segmenting demand and coefficient of variation, and how do you identify based upon that safety stock, what's your cycle stock, container capacity, all the way to more of the traditional Six Sigma type stuff. But there's a ton of math. And again, it's another one of those, hey, I wish I had a reference way back when, so I didn't have to reinvent the wheel over and over again.
That's great. I'll make sure to watch out for that book. Do you have a release date goal in mind?
Yeah, we did. We had a couple. we blew right by those. So we're both, Michael O'Connor, who's a PhD, I call him Dr. Math. He and I, we're busy guys. So I think our publisher is not too thrilled with us. So I'm not even going to put a date out right now.
I understand. I had to ask for our audience in case they were wondering.
Yeah.
Before we go, do you have any final thoughts about Kaizen?
In the end, we got to understand that nothing's perfect, and it's really a continuous improvement journey. So just keep working, keep trying to improve, keep experimenting. That's how you're going to learn. You're going to learn by doing. You can pick up a book. I think my book could be helpful, but still, at the end of the day, you got to go and try to do this stuff.
Perfect. Well, you heard it from Mark Hamel. Mark is the author of the Kaizen Event Fieldbook, which you can get at kaizenfieldbook.com, where you can also access his lean blog, Gemba Tales. Mark also has a lean math blog at leanmath.com. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
Everyone, it's about that time where we have to say goodbye. This is Antonio Ferraro, and thanks to all of you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us on Safety Experts Talk. If you have suggestions for future podcasts, send them to podcast@creativesafetysupply.com. For more safety experts talking about safety news, OSHA regulations, PPE, Lean, 5S, or continuous improvement, go to creativesafetysupply.com/podcast.